Well, hi there. Once again, Michael Murphy here from Leaderscape as we attempt to engage with this crazy roller coaster journey of reshaping the church, redesigning, re-engineering. And I'm delighted today to be joined by a bunch of amazing leaders from one of the most beautiful parts of the United States. Charleston in South Carolina, Seacoast Church. Josh Surrat, Greg Surrat, and a bunch of your crew. Hi, Josh. How you doing? Thanks so much for joining us today.
We are doing well, man. I'm so thankful to be on with you. Thank you for what you're doing and the content you're putting out for us pastors. I am one that's been watching every time you've gone live. I've gotten on to see what you have to say. Been super helpful to try to navigate these crazy times.
Very kind. Yeah, we're all doing our part. Now, just set the scene here, folks. This is our, I think, our fourth case study that we're doing. We'll do a couple more just to give lead pastors, particularly, and creative pastors, the opportunity just to have a little bit of a fly on the wall look at the way some of the key churches in the US and around the world have kind of negotiated this. I love what someone said the other day. I think Julian Lowe from Oasis in LA. He said, before I actually was able to move forward, I had to grieve for a moment. I had to here's a new lead pastor like you. They've got a beautiful building and they're having great momentum. And he said, I just had to take a breath and go, God, what the? Josh, you've just opened a new building. You've been as formally as the lead pastor only for a relatively short time. And then what was your what the?
Well, exactly. I mean, we have had a lot of just great momentum in the new space, and we've had a great year. Our team is in a great place. I feel like we had just come off of a executive team retreat back in February, where we were even doing some realignment of our team and of our strategy, and felt like we were positioned well to jump into this next year. And really, Michael, we feel like we've had to plant a new church in a week. It felt like with all that has changed, we had to ask the question, which is always a fun question to do as an exercise with a group of, hey, well, how would you do ministry if you couldn't meet in the building? But it's not nearly as much fun when it is your current reality.
Go live.
Yeah, exactly.
What are some of those philosophical shifts, Josh, that you've had to kind of get your head and your heart around?
Well, I think the biggest one for us was, first things first, was the weekend, right? I mean, we've got this big weekend experience that we do on multiple campuses. So we have 14 locations. And so it was figuring out, what does that need to look like? And it has evolved. And I would just encourage any pastor who's watching this, you probably haven't figured it out completely yet. I know we definitely have. In our first weekend, we were on a platform. We used some old worship an old worship set that we had from a few months ago, and launched it because we just had very little time to make it happen. And it worked, and it was a great experience. But we decided to move our environment into more of a living room environment that reflects better what people's experience is. And I'm not saying it's the right way to do it. I think everybody's doing the best they can, and everybody's doing it according to the way they've been called to. But for me, a platform has a need when you've got gatherings of large numbers of people, or hundreds or thousands of people. That's why you need a platform. That's why you need a live band with amplification, all of that stuff. And so we've really adjusted it to feel more like we're in your living room. We're still bringing a sermon. We're still bringing worship, but we've tried to adapt that to what it looks like in people's living room, minus the screaming children. I joke that if we're worried about people falling in love with a house church, the last weekend before we go back to live services in a building, we'll bring all the kids into that environment. They'll see what it really looks like.
First week, we had worship on the TV, and our grandsons thumping into each other. So we had world championship worship and wrestling happening all at one time. It was hilarious.
Oh, I love it.
Greg, you are obviously the president of ARC and encourager of pastors all over the world. And given that perspective, you're hearing from a lot of guys. I'm sure that you've got a lot of thoughts in terms of how they're doing out there. Love to hear your perspective on all of this like weak pivot that's happened that could mean the church, in parts anyway, changes forever?
I think it will, and I think it should. And I am so encouraged by what I see. I think that this, we thought when the virus came that this could be the church's finest hour, and I believe that it is from what I see. I see churches. This weekend, I went to church probably in 20 to 25 different churches.
Me too. I was church hopping.
And, it's just amazing. The innovation that we are seeing today in the church world is unlike, and listen, I was there for multi-site. I was there for, hey, let's take, contemporary church or traditional church, Pentecostal church, and let's make it for unchurched people. I have never seen innovation like I have seen these days. You're seeing amazing, amazing things. And, this coronavirus, and I think every day further emphasizes to people their need for something beyond themselves. Mm-hmm. And I know our church, churches all over, are having more attendance on the weekend in however they're doing it than we had when we were in a building. I think one of the reasons is because we're all going to each other's church, but the numbers are huge. They're huge.
Yeah.
And just an antidote, I saw it today, Josh, I know you saw it on our campus pastors thread, but there was a girl that was an atheist and a very depressed, atheist during this time. Hit our Facebook page. I saw the very first thing she put on the Facebook page. And then one of our, Margaret, you're going to meet her in a minute, but one of her team and Jack's team interacted with this girl. And anyway, long and short of it is that she came to online church, committed her life to Christ, and then put it on her Facebook about what had happened to her, and said, hey, I've been an atheist for 10 years and I found hope today. And to all of her friends. And that's just an anecdote story, and it's not unique to Seacoast. It's happening everywhere.
That's amazing. You had a conversation. We will come to you in a moment, Margaret, because you're, as operations director, you were kind of in a lot of the hub of rebuilding church in about a week and a bit. Greg, you had, I don't know whether you remember talking about this, but you had a conversation with Craig Rochelle a little while ago. And you asked him a really great question. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do? And he talked about maybe something similar to what we're experiencing for this season.
Exactly. He and I had a conversation, and we were talking about how it's so difficult for church planters these days in a lot of ways, because there's really not that much new. You know what I'm saying? Sure. We're taking models that are 15, 20 years old and kind of trying to reproduce them. And guys are doing great jobs at it. But what we were saying is that somebody needs to reinvent church for this generation. Somebody needs to disrupt, how church is done, and probably leverage the technology. And guess what? We're all doing that.
Voila, that's right.
It's a new day. That's right.
So, Margaret, I'm going to pray for you in a moment, because your world, not only church world was disrupted, but your world was obviously disrupted at this time. Talk about just how you were able to, were needed to take the visionary components of Pastor Josh and Pastor Greg and really drill them in to get some traction. Rubber hits the road in your world, that's for sure.
Sure. So, our entire organizational strategy shifted, and we had to shift it very quickly. And so I'm thankful for leaders like Pastor Josh and Pastor Greg, who were able to just communicate what they wanted to see, what the big ideas were. And then they kind of handed that off to my team to kind of put some tactics around. But really what we saw is that our entire communication strategy as a staff had to change. Our ministry strategy had to change. Everybody became staff of Church Online at that point. Like everybody, no matter what your title was, you were working for our Church Online. And so I just love the idea that we're just reallocating resources to the front lines of what our organization looks like now. I think we've had a lot of conversations.
We're all working from home, Margaret, and that's a garbage truck going outside. It's early in Sydney right now, so I'm not even going to apologise. We got dogs, we got cat, we got grandkids, they're likely to come in any moment. The dog might jump on my head, who knows? But I apologise for interrupting. Go.
No, you're great. I was actually going to talk about how we've had to really rethink working from home, and we've had to have a lot of conversations with our staff about what ministry looks like in a work from home culture. And so we spent a lot of time investing in our staff, giving them the tools that they need to make it work in this season where there's a lot that's just up in the air. We've tried to streamline that for them so that they don't feel confused or anxious about how they're balancing the needs of the ministry job that they have and their personal family needs as well.
Beautiful. Give me a top 2 or 3 on that, because that's a big issue for if you've got a medium-sized church or a larger church. Working distributed rather than gathered has a whole lot of complexities. What are some of those things, Margaret, that you felt like was important to really adopt quickly?
I think the number one thing to focus on is that we've got to set a new normal, and that means personally and as a team. So for my advice would be that each person on staff needs to set an actual routine that they have a conversation with their leader about on what their new normal looks like, from their schedule to their goals to what their everyday working hours look like. The second thing that I would mention is that being a leader in this time is different than what we saw a month ago. And so you really need to rethink what your culture as a team should feel like and what the expectations are there, and just get uber clear with those conversations and make sure everybody's on the same page.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Josh, as you kind of led the team through this, Margaret mentioned there was really the redeployment of your resources that had to shift very, very quickly in order to maximize the opportunity, help your church to feel cared for, because you've got a very multi-generational church as well. And obviously there are some there that are more naturally adept to an online experience than others. How did you cope with embracing that breadth of generations?
Yeah, it's been fun. Honestly, I would say a lot of it is realizing that we are a high-tech church now, but we're also have an opportunity to be a very high-touch church. And so part of our strategy was we're going to call everybody in our database. And so we started with the oldest people in our church first. I think my dad was a little upset at how soon he got a call. But we deployed not only our team, but Dream Team as well, volunteers, to get on the phone and just check in. How are you doing? Do you need any help navigating your own life, groceries? Because a lot of the more at-risk people we just want to care for. And so we've done that very organically, and we've empowered people to do it. But then also, how are you adjusting to online? Is there anything we can help walk you through your experience? And so whether that's downloading the app, whether that's helping on the giving piece of it, but we just, I think people are thinking, oh gosh, it's high touch or high tech, and how do we figure that out? It's also an opportunity to be very personal, to get a phone call from their pastor that they, maybe haven't had in the entire time that they've been here, just to check in with them to see how they're doing. And so that's been really, really fun. But then it's also what it's done for us, Michael, is it has reignited an innovative spirit in us. And let me just say this about that. What it feels like is paralysis at times, fear. I'm not sure what to do next. I'm not sure how to lead in this. Wow. And so let me just be very honest. Innovation in its infancy is not pretty. It's, oh gosh, we have a problem and we aren't equipped for this problem. And so I just want to, if there's a pastor out there that's feeling that, so do I. Welcome to our world. That's the nature of a changing reality. But it has allowed us to really become innovative again. And it's not by looking at what other churches are doing, because guess what? There's not a lot out there on what other churches are doing. It's going, what is the best, what are the needs of our community right now? And how can we most quickly meet them? And I think a leadership lesson for me long-term is that there's a lot more power and innovation and really starting from the needs that we're trying to reach than trying to copy what somebody else is trying to do around the country. And so one example, Michael, we decided literally yesterday that we're going to do First Wednesday. That's a big worship night for us. We've always, it's been like a highlight of our I think you probably preached at one for us before.
Sure. Yeah.
And real disappointed that we weren't going to be able to do that. But we saw actually Steph Curry utilized Instagram on Friday night last week and invited a bunch of worship leaders in to do worship. They called it Home and Hallelujah.
Yeah.
And so we just decided, you know what, we're going to do First Wednesday on Instagram. I've got about 8 or 10 different leaders from around the country. Some are like the Christine Caines and Jeremy Fosters and Scott Williams of the world that'll give us a short devotional, and some will be worship people that are going to share their songs with us. And so the process, and I know it's a long way to answer your question, but the process is, okay, here's a great idea. Let's do it. The problem is a lot of our church isn't on Instagram. What do we do about that? Well, right now our team is furiously working between now and Wednesday. It's Monday, just, I don't know when this will air, but right now it's Monday. We have 2 days, and they are training the people who are maybe a little bit older, who haven't been on it. They're training them how to experience First Wednesday this week. And they're just getting down to the nuts and bolts of open up this app, start an account. Here's how you get on. And so just realizing that you've got to be extra clear. And I'm just going to pretend like we have to explain it to my grandfather, who's an incredible man of God, but just thinking that way helps us to make sure we're really clear on bringing the church with us and not just, and the only reason I'm doing it on Instagram is because that's the platform that is best suited for the kind of experience that we're talking about doing on Wednesday. It's not because I have a problem with Facebook or, our other platforms. It's just that one works the best. And so trying to, that's just one example, but trying to make sure we're giving people the tools to get on board with the content that we're bringing.
Gosh, I love your authenticity. Thank you so much for sharing that, Josh. And it's true that that before innovation comes intimidation. And I think a lot of guys, the danger is that you do freeze. Greg, have you forgiven Josh for having you called like in the first 3 or 4 in the church? Is that something that you need any help with there?
Yeah, I'm going to have to leave the meeting earlier than I want to, because I got another video. My life is video calls, Michael. I'm telling you right now. But this is fun. It's not fun, the virus itself.
No.
And, people sick and all of that. And that's another part of what the church can jump in and do. But the innovative part of it is just a lot of fun. I'll tell you one story about calling all of the at-risk people, I'd like to call them that, which I was one. But one of the campus pastors in the campus pastor thread said, how do you keep these calls with older folks in our church down to 30 minutes to an hour? we had people that, hey, you called me. This is awesome. Let's talk. And so that's been good. And it's also been a challenge. I also hooked up my 85-year-old father, who had a class that he taught once a week at a building, and they've not been seeing each other. They're all the people that age are pretty cloistered, and so I said, let me get you guys on a Zoom call like we're on right now.
Yeah.
Oh, why did I do that? I don't understand. The payoff was wonderful, but getting 30 people, in their 80s on Zoom was one of the funniest things I've ever done in my life. It was pretty incredible.
Just before you go, I had a talk with a church planter. We've been talking at churches of thousands at one end and 90 of the other. This guy hadn't planted yet, and he was crestfallen. He's like, oh, and I literally went to the restroom before I got onto the call, and I felt the Holy Spirit whisper, says, tell him to plant anyway. And I came onto the call. Hey, I'd never met this guy. And I said, look, take this forward. I just feel like God might have, and he lit up. Well, they're on a pathway now, a trajectory to launch anyway online, rather than like how to keep his team buoyed up for the next 6 months. He was thinking, man, what are we going to do? And I said, so we'll see what happens. But he is pumped about going live without a building, without a premise. I said, dude, it's a leveler. No one knows that you haven't got the Taj Mahal to meet in. And so we're having a bit of fun with that as well. Thanks so much for joining us, Greg. We really appreciate you. Jack, you're the creative director of Seacoast. And again, as Pastor Josh spoke earlier on, your re-engineering of a lot of the visual digital space to enhance people's experience has been so crucial in this whole journey. Talk about how you process that, how you got the team moving in the right direction, and some of the little things that you feel like have been seminal in laying this up.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. There was we talked a little bit earlier about how, you know, a lot of churches, no one felt prepared for this, and I think, you know, some churches feel maybe more prepared than others, and I think one of the things that was interesting is, you know, as Josh, I think Mark kind of mentioned, when we made the call that first weekend that we weren't going to have services in our facilities and we were all going to be online together. The time between that call being made and the service going live was really hours. And one of the things that we actually realized is, in terms of communications, we were actually fairly well prepared for that sort of thing, because we have disaster and crisis communication templates for hurricanes. And so one of the first things my team did was I had them pull that you know, document and start working from it and figure out, hey, what are the things in here that we can use right now? Because, you know, and that included setting up a web page for updates, you know, sending out, you know, kind of those first communications. And so in a sense, it was interesting to see, you know, like, so if you'd asked us, you know, a couple months ago, are you prepared for a pandemic that keeps everyone at home and everything moving online? I think we'd say, gosh, no, we are not prepared for that. But what's interesting is to see the different ways in which we actually were prepared. We just didn't know that we were.
Wow.
And I think that one of the things I would encourage churches right now to think through is it's really easy to look at some other churches and think, oh gosh, you know, man, they're really set up well for this moment. And I think the reality is that you know, if the church is the church, then God has prepared every church for this moment in ways that are going to be unique to them. And I would really encourage them to not focus on, you know, I don't know how to get my stuff online. I don't know how to do what they're doing. I would say that we're all learning from each other right now. I think everyone on this call has kind of said we're all learning from each other in a lot of different ways. But what I would really encourage churches is there are ways in which we need to learn from you too. Because I think that God has probably set up everyone for this moment in ways that they just didn't realize were there. In terms of some of the things we needed to do, you know, really quickly is, you know, we knew that we needed to figure out the how we were going to shoot weekend services. So, you know, production, worship, video, teaching team, how they were all going to work together. One of the things we also realized really quickly is we needed to think through what the new mindsets were going to be of people watching. And so, you know, that first weekend we saw some people who we thought did it better than us, but we also realized, gosh, they have this feel that we like in terms of people gathered together, but man, there are 20 people in that shot. And, you know, everyone's mindset has changed so quickly right now. And so we've moved to, hey, we need to keep a lot fewer people together. And gosh, now we need to make sure that they're a little bit more distant from each other, and really thinking through what are all of the things people are going to notice as they see these, and how do we make sure we're staying mindful of, you know, really living into these new realities of social distancing and really being intentional about. So we've talked about, you know, how we're going to do, you know, weekends going forward in terms of really communicating visually that we are being cautious and that we are being really mindful of what everyone is being asked to do right now.
Yeah.
We also kind of realized that, hey, we need a look for this. We need a look that's distinctive so that people know what we're doing. We also need to call it something. And so we did a couple things really quickly. The very first thing we did was we set up that update page. That was kind of the, you know, the page for all of our big important updates related to this crisis and what we were doing and how we were reacting, because we knew that was kind of the very first thing people need to know is what's closed, for how long, what are we doing right now. The second thing we did the next week was all about the weekend service in terms of, one, how do we adapt our weekend service to fit this new reality, but also how do we empower people to do that right where they are? And so that means teaching them to think through how can I set the space? How do I host this? How do I lead my family through this? And so we created Seacoast at Home, and Seacoast at Home is kind of all of our strategy around, hey, this is how you have a Seacoast weekend experience wherever you are. And so we set up that was our second page that we set up in terms of equipping everyone and empowering everyone to have a weekend experience right where you are in terms of, hey, here's how you get stuff for your kids, for your students. If you're a small group, here's how you can continue to connect with your small group. And we're not done. We're still updating those things. We're going to look at reworking a lot of our kids content this week to make that better for people. And then the next thing we did was we wanted to make sure that we were providing encouragement and content to our people every day if we could. And so we made Seacoast on the Go. And Seacoast on the Go is all about that regular content that we're trying to create, but not just content in terms of like consumables, but really chances for people to engage and connect and really stay, connected with each other and not just with us. And so those are kind of things we knew we needed to do really quickly. The last thing we did last week, and this is kind of the fourth page that we got set up, is our Care and Serve page. And that's kind of hey, some people need help. They need help finding food. They need help getting financial information together. Yeah. They need help with medical questions. And so we set up a Care and Serve page that's all about, hey, here's some information that you need, but also people really need something to do right now. People want to help, and they also want to know, how can I get involved in what's happening? And so the Care and Serve page was our last thing that we got set up, and that finally went live at the end of last week in terms of telling people, here's some information that might be helpful to you, here's what we're doing, and here are some things that you can do right where you are. And so kind of all of those pieces, the important updates, the weekend content, the daily content, and then the how you can help, we knew we needed to get all those together, and we just kind of figured out, hey, the health updates has priority, and then the weekend stuff, and then kind of figure out how to prioritize each of those, but also getting them online as quickly as we could.
That's amazing. That's amazing, Jack. I think Jack Howie, the first and the second, we're very proud of you, being nimble as you have been, to be able to help lead the whole creative and technical charge on this. Just maybe between Jack and Pastor Josh there, are there any kind of tips that you are recommending? I know that you guys have done team teaching for a long time. You've created a culture there over a long time now of encouragement, but also of critique in order to get better. What would be some of those for either worship leaders and those that are involved in bringing the worship experience through the camera, and also your communicators? I think your preacher this week is in isolation. He's actually tested positive for COVID-19. Maybe start with you, Josh, on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the different platforms just require maybe a little bit of a different approach to the message. So for us, knowing that everybody's experiencing this weekend in their home with kids, with all of that, we have decided to move to a little bit of a shorter service. We would normally go about an hour 15, but we're looking at probably 45 minutes to 55 minutes right now. We're still figuring that out. I think first weekend we were too long. Last weekend we were a little too short. So we're still experimenting, but just trying to figure out what's an appropriate length there. And then for us anyways, the teaching, we used to do a message run through with a group of people in the room that we would get critique on it. We don't really have that luxury anymore. We can't grab everybody in the room. And so we're doing lots of Zoom calls and planning and preparation together. And then as we get into the room, it feels a little bit more like a small group because we've got our worship team gathered around us. We're getting some feedback. And we really want to kind of model our best version of what a small group could look like. Obviously, the teaching being a sermon, that's not usually the case in a small group, but we're trying to model what that might look like. And again, it's going to look different each time. This weekend, our pastor, like you said, he's tested positive for COVID. He's actually technically off of quarantine now, but just out of an abundance of caution to all of the rest of our team, we're going to record him alone, and him and his wife will do it together. But and so I think the learning there is that the way that you deliver it is a lot less important than the fact that you deliver it with your heart, with your culture, with your care. You know, I think, trust me, I've thought, oh my gosh, what if all of our people discover Stephen Furtick and you know, all these great Hillsongs and all these great churches? It's like they already know about those churches, but we're their church. We're the ones that are caring for their kids and doing their families' funerals and weddings. And so your people want to hear from your heart. And so that's the encouragement, is don't get bogged down in all of the methodology. Just be true to who you are, keep improving, keep learning for sure. But your church needs to hear from you, and they need to hear from your heart. And it doesn't need to be polished right now. It doesn't need to be slick right now. None of our lives are polished or slick right now. We you know, we're trying to figure out how to get toilet paper for tomorrow. That, you know, we don't need to go see this amazing production, you know, so just give yourself a break, take a deep breath, and know that you're going to keep making improvements on this. We're all beginners. We are all beginners right now.
Oh, true.
And doing church this way. And so stop putting pressure on yourself like you should be an expert, because there are none right now. We're all learning together.
That's so fantastic. And I think that authenticity and vulnerability, it's kind of the new ambience. We don't have the coffee machine in the foyer. We don't have the mood music. We don't have the lights just right. We don't have the buzz. And so it's the ability of a worship leader to just pour their heart out. I found myself in the lounge room, like the kids were much more kind of well-behaved this week, our grandkids who live with us. And I was on the couch just worshiping God, tears streaming down my face. And I'm like, God, this absolutely works. My granddaughter is FaceTiming me right now. And so I'll pass on that for the moment and get to her in a moment. But so, yeah, just that rawness, I think, is so vital. And I agree with you. I think that's what people want. They want that intimate connection with people they know and love and trust. And
well, Michael, you mentioned worship leaders too. I think that's one great point, is we've got to be a little more directive too in our worship leading. In other words, imagine their environment, and then, you know, just talk to them. We had one of our live worship events on Instagram last week, and one of the comments that came through was a very concerned person whose family was kind of in end stages and needed healing prayer. And our worship leader stopped leading worship in that moment, addressed the comment, prayed for the comments, and then continued. And it was like, man, this idea, you know, that you need to finish the song because you started, it was just a beautiful moment that was real, that was authentic. And so I think just encouraging all of us that in whatever platforms that we're using, it's about people. It's always been about people. And we may need to be a little bit more instructive at times, like, hey, I know it's uncomfortable to sing right there in your living room, but I want to encourage you right now to go for it. Or, you know, why don't you guys clap? Just being a little bit more instructive, because they don't have the positive peer pressure of a big room where they just kind of know what to do. And we have a lot of brand new people joining, so we got to be mindful of that. And
for some time, the families worshiping together for the first time, it's kind of a bit awkward. They've never done this before. Again, where they raise their hands or sit. I think actually at the moment, probably a huge percentage of our people are listening and taking it all in and feeling a little bit. That's okay. It's okay, exactly. And provided that's the pitch. I doing a bit of church hopping like your dad did on the weekend, of trying to take in as many experiences. One little distinction was there were some really wonderful church experiences on TV, and there were others that brought church into our lounge room. And though it might seem pedantic, the difference in the experience was very, very different. I wasn't watching church. Even funny, even camera angles. There was some here, and they'd had a side camera. I'm like, that makes me feel like I'm watching a TV program about church, rather than kind of, you know, that's a personal kind of little beef. But I just think that Jack, you were going to say something about just really communicating.
Yeah, well, I think, going back a little bit to, in terms of, you'd asked about how this has impacted some of our rhythms and, just some of the ways we're used to preparing for the weekend in terms of message planning. And I think one of the things that for me, I can't remember if Josh, if it was you or Dad that mentioned this earlier, but it feels like we're kind of in this season of really doing a lot of innovation right now. And that's really exciting. And for me, so, I've been a part of Seacoast since I was a kid. I grew up here. And for me, one of the things about Seacoast that I've always really loved is we are always ready to try something different. And I think that one of the things I've really loved about the last couple of weeks working with my team and kind of working with the different teams is kind of the hey, what if we did this? And everyone kind of thinks about it for a minute. And it's like, okay, yeah, let's do that. Like John, you were talking about the first Wednesday we're doing on Wednesday when that chat started last night. Like my immediate thoughts were like, all right, what does this mean for my team? What are you going to need from video? Is this going to murder them? What's going to happen? But I'm like, you know what? I have a lot of questions and I'm just going to step back for a little bit and let this conversation play out. Because what I don't want is to jump in and kind of kill the excitement and the momentum. And so I'm like, I'm going to put my phone down and I'm going to come back to this in 20 minutes and I'm just going to see what happens. And come back 20 minutes. I was like, oh, actually none of my concerns were really valid. And I love where this is going and this is all great. And kind of that ability to, hey, what if we did this? Okay, let's do this. So Josh, that video that you mentioned where, we're making a video to help people get on Instagram and how to do a live, that should be done in about half an hour. And we just joined you and Brandon for that like half an hour ago. And we first had the idea for that this morning. And just kind of the ability to very quickly decide, what if we did this? Great, let's do that. And I think we just get so used to, a decision. And there's a lot of good things about, those normal times when we can have an idea, take a couple of weeks to think about it, implement it over a few months, work out that's great. And everyone loves that. But one of the things I love about Seacoast is our ability to pivot to, we're going to move very quickly and we're going to make a lot of decisions and we're just going to try things. And then we're going to see what we need to do after that. And that's just been really exciting and a lot of fun.
That whole agile leadership kind of philosophy that I think was articulated about 3 years ago, first time, but just the idea of teams and as us as, kind of hierarchical leaders or leaders further up the leadership. And again, I know you don't think this way, but I'm just, part of that is just is permission giving. It's like, let it play out. Give the team their head and just the power of that. I think that even in a broader sense, we're living right now, in my opinion, in an Ephesians 4:11 on steroids moment, where we as those that fivefold ministry gifts are all about releasing the saints, as Paul writes to the Ephesians, for the work of the ministry. And if we can do that right, we're going to get an explosion of exponential touch points and connection all over the world that we never dreamed possible, where we were coming to church. We're releasing the church to become the church. And I think that's very, very powerful. Josh, we're going to wind this up in a moment, but thank you so much for your time. Anything about what's next? What might be the next focus for you guys? Not next as in instead of online, but in finessing this, as we've discussed earlier on. This is like an onion that we're peeling the layers off. And once we got that, we got the website, like you well articulated, Jack. We got the update page, and then finessed what we're going to be doing in these couple of steps. What do you feel like might be your next focus, Josh, in terms of strategic priorities to continue to move forward with this whole thing?
That's good. Well, the first thing I did is I felt like I needed to spice up this call by taking you to my bedroom. And so I did that. I innovated that right on the fly.
Wow.
And,
wow.
That's because that's where my charger was. I was in the only quiet place, which is my porch, but there's no outlet there. So, no, but I love your question, because I think the reality is just beginning to sit in with me that figuring out how to do church differently is not the crisis that we are in for. That felt like the crisis in the first couple of weeks, but really we had to pause, we had to adapt, we had to adjust our strategy, and we're doing that. I'd say we've done it, but it's continuously being adjusted. But I think the real crisis is, and again, I'm not an alarmist, I have no idea how this is going to go, but where I live, we are still at the very beginning of the curve of how this is impacting our nation. And we're seeing in places like New York City, and now they're projecting New Orleans and Detroit and Chicago and several major cities. We're seeing a little bit of what this may look like here. And it, of course, it looks a lot like what Italy looks like. And so I think, yes, we've got to figure out church, and we've got to keep on making adjustments to that. But let's not solve that and miss the actual opportunity for the church to really partner with Jesus on mission and being his hands and feet in the middle of a crisis that our generation, our world has never known to this date. And so I think that the next layer is going to be less about self-preservation of the church and more about being as missional as we possibly can be. And you just talked about Ephesians 4:11, deploying our people. And it's just, there's no answers. It looks so different. That mission is always get my hands dirty. Let me show up at the hospital. Let me show up to the place of need. Let me feed it. And we can't do a lot of those things. So it's really challenging for us right now. But I think that's the real crisis, is that we're going to have people that we love and know that are affected by this. We already are seeing some of that here in Charleston. But and again, I am praying for this to end this moment. And I have faith that can happen. But I think we also need to be prepared to lead in a crisis that our pretty and cute weekend services, done as well as we possibly can, are not going to be the answer to the question. They're going to be part of the equation. So don't mishear me on that. I love the church. But the church, we've always said, it's not about a building. It's not about just a service. And I think that we are entering into some days where we're really going to see that as a lived reality, that we have an opportunity to live in. And so I don't have any answers, but I think that is a big part of that. And I think it's going to be, Margaret touched on it already, I think it's going to be a massive redeployment of our resources and of our teams. And we're just going to have to be extremely flexible and be attentive to what God is doing. And so I'm still living in part A of that, of, we got to adapt and it's great. We're going to keep doing it. But I think that there is the real crisis is yet to be experienced. And if it does come in the way that they're projecting, and not mainstream media necessarily, but the physicians who are experts here, I think we're going to have a real opportunity to minister to people who don't have hope, and we have the answer to that hope. We know Jesus. We know that platitudes and pithy statements aren't going to solve this. It's going to be truly expressing the hope and love that we have in Christ to a world that is dying to find it.
Wow. So good and so true. I think that inevitably when when what we've known is under threat, we go into overdrive to preserve that. And I get that, and that's appropriate for a season, but it's all to the end of meeting the needs of those that are vulnerable and hurting. The reason we're permitting the circumstances to bend us out of shape, I don't believe we're actually just responding to the government. We're not just submitting. I think we're submitting to the gospel. We're submitting to the government. They're saying social distancing, but the gospel says care for the least and the lost. Make sure you don't do anything that compromises them. And so it's a tension that we're walking here for the end of being the church when our world needs us most. We prayed for days like this. We didn't pray for a virus, but we prayed for days when people's hearts would be open, not in an opportunistic way, but in a way that genuinely opens the path of their hearts to the love and the grace of God. There's a wave, a tidal wave of mercy that's coming, and we're not riding this wave. We are the wave. That's what I believe.
So good.
Thank you so much, Seacoast. Thank you so much, Pastor Josh, Jack, Margaret. Greg, who had to be on another call. This is going to be a wonderful help to so many lead pastors. If you are watching this as a lead pastor, I'm just giving you a bit of a sneak preview, a little fly on the wall exercise for some of the truly the great churches. These guys are saying, we're learning as we go. So you don't be too hard on yourself, okay? Understand this is new for everyone, and we're proud of you in all that God is doing through you as you've been able to flex, in some cases with minimal resources, in order to bring the amazing gospel into the hearts and homes of people that are desperate for it right now. We love you, lead pastors and teams, and let us know if there's anything we can do to help. If you're not yet in Lead Pastors Momentum Central, totally free. That's our staging ground for things like this to keep you up to date, not just with information, but real strategic priorities. Pastor Josh, Jack, Margaret, God bless you. Thank you so much for being with us, and we will no doubt catch you real soon.
Thank you, Michael.